Hey everybody, welcome to Bookmas Day 4 and I'm here today with our November wrap-up. So in the first half of November we read 6 books, that's in our mid-month wrap-up, so I'll link that down below. That features The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, The Patron Saints of Motion Pictures and Vacuum Cleaner Repair by Christine Simon, I Am Nobody's Nigger by Dean Atta, Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, The 10 Riddles of Arthur Quicksmith by Loris Owen, and The Killer on the Wall by Emma Kavanagh. In the last half of the month, we managed to read another 10 books. So I'll give you some reading stats to start with, and then I'm going to do my Believathon wrap-up because we were reading mostly for How to Train Your Gavin's Believathon this month. I'll link his channel and the Believathon Twitter down below so you can check it all out. So in November, we were aiming to read 7,757 pages. We managed to read 5,067, so we were just under 2/3 of the way there, which I'm not actually that mad about. Like, I've been slumping a little bit in my personal reading. Like, Sean and I have still been reading a lot of books together, but I'm halfway through like 4 of my own books and I just can't finish any of them, so that's been grand. But this month we read 1 5-star book, 1 4.5-star book, 8 4-star books, 1 3.5-star book, 3 3-star book, and 1 2-star book. So it wasn't too bad of a reading month. Like, there was a lot of 4 stars, a lot of that was like nearly perfect, and we're going to be talking about a lot of those today. But without further ado, let me run you through what we ended up doing with Believathon. So the first prompt for Believathon was a key, which was to read a mystery, and for that we read The 10 Riddles of Arthur Quicksmith, which I talked about in our mid-month wrap-up. We also ended up doubling up on this one. So we doubled up on it for The Shadow, which was a book published in 2020. We then got The Fingerprints, which was to read a book from an author from a different culture, for which we read The Unadoptables by Hannah Took, which was a 4-star read. This follows a diverse cast of characters who have been cast as unadoptable by the person who runs their orphanage. So she says that they're horrible people and that they're never going to be able to find a home, and then somebody comes along and she kind of tries to sell them to this guy who's going to end up using them for slave labour. They get wise to the scheme and they manage to escape, and they're kind of trying to track down one of their families in the hope that their parents will adopt all of them. It kind of reminded me of like a Roald Dahl story. There was some series of unfortunate events vibes in there. So if you're a fan of the Baudelaire orphans and their crazy adventures, The Unadoptables will be a story that appeals to you. It just felt more like a classic children's tale rather than a recent release, which was what I appreciated the most. I think the setting was really interesting. So it's set in Amsterdam and the setting is very vibrant, and I think that the characters are all brilliant, and I think that the main kind of story behind it is a very uplifting one. I have seen some people giving this one bad reviews, as I haven't been adopted, I haven't been in the children's care system, so I can't speak about that from a personal experience. So I will link a couple of reviews down below so that you can make up your own mind as to whether this would be a book that would be appropriate for you to read or not. I'm on the side of it being the more uplifting one, but I know some people do find even the title itself to be quite harmful, so it's best to kind of look into this one before you pick it up. The next Believathon prompt was The Scream, which to read a book out loud, and for that we read The Crooked Sixpence by Jennifer Bell, which was the middle grade monthly book of the month for November. I really enjoyed this one. So Jennifer Bell is the author of Wonderscape, and this was her first book series. So Wonderscape only came out earlier in the year, and we read this for Believathon earlier in the year, and we've been thinking about reading The Crooked Sixpence since then anyway. So this is a girl and her brother. Their granny, she falls downstairs I think, and she breaks a bone. When we meet them, they're in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, and she has a bracelet round her wrist that she's always worn, that she's never removed, and they have to cut it off. And this kind of something really small starts off a huge series of events where these characters find out that their gran comes from like a secret world and they have secret talents that they don't know about. It's a very interesting story. So the illustrations throughout there by Carl James Mountford, who is such a brilliant children's illustrator, and they really do add a lot more to the tale. I think that this was another one that we gave 4 stars to. I'm so certain that it's gonna get better as the series goes on, because there was a lot of establishing the world. So there are it's like everyday objects that do extraordinary things. So there's like say for example you had like a comb, but instead of combing your hair with it would be like a lock picking device. Or there's... They're called Uncommons. The series is called the Uncommoners series, and our main character has the talent that, like, when she touches an uncommon object, she feels heat. So that's obviously going to become more relevant later in the series as well. But this is a great start to the trilogy, and I'm looking forward to carrying on with the rest of them. The next book that we read was another one that we doubled up on the prompt for. So for the Torn Page prompt, which was to read a book that had supernatural elements, and for the Flash of Lightning prompt, which is to read a book that incorporates folk tales, for both of these prompts, we chose to read The Haunting of Aveline Jones by Phil Hicks. This follows a girl called Aveline who has to go and stay with her auntie because her granny up in Scotland has gotten ill and her mum needs to go and care for her. So Aveline turns up in this little seaside town called Malmouth, and she is horrified to see that there's like a really creepy, like realistic child scarecrow outside one of her neighbours' houses, and she's like, oh, it's a bit weird, that must be like a really creepy Halloween decoration. But she discovers that there's actually a ghost story that is set in the town, and it's a kind of way to ward off this ghostly apparition. And it's really cleverly told because Aveline gets a book of ghost stories. She loves ghost stories, and she reads this book and she discovers that the book is the old possession of a girl who went missing in the town many years ago. And I just think it's such a well-crafted story. Like, the chilling elements are really scary. Like, this is one that I found quite unsettling, even though I'm an adult reader reading this. And like, the illustrations throughout were quite nice as well. It adds a lot to the atmosphere. I was reading this through NetGalley, so a huge thank you to the publishers for accepting my request to read this through NetGalley. The same about the Unadoptables as well, that was also a NetGalley one. So although I loved the illustrations in both, I think that this would really add something if I read it physically. So these are books that I'm going to be revisiting at some point in the future. And The Haunting of Aveline Jones we also gave 4 stars to. The next book was another one that we doubled up. So for the prompt for A Crown, which was to read a book set in an alternate universe, and for the Footprints, which was to read a book with a prominent villain, we decided to read Wondersmith by Jessica Townsend for both of these. Wondersmith is the sequel to Nevermore, which is the first book in the Morrigan Grove series. And I loved this. This was our 5-star read for this month. It wasn't quite as good as the first book. There's a few kind of pacing issues in this one. Whereas the first book, if you've read Nevermore, you'll know that there's a girl called Morrigan Crow. She thinks that she is a cursed child. She gets sucked away to this other universe, and she is put through these things called like the Wonder Trials to try and become a Wondersmith, and to be accepted into the Wonder Society. And so she is doing, in the first book, these different kind of tasks, and because each one, it's like a countdown towards like, oh, will she get in, will she not? The pacing is incredible, and we read the whole book in one day. This one is a bit slower because there's like a mystery element going on, and Morrigan has to take some time away from the school because she gets in trouble for some things that are going on, and there's a lot of kind of her being a bit kind of disenfranchised and feeling left out and not too sure what she's doing with herself and what she's doing in this world. And it made it a bit of a slower read, but I also think that it adds so much to Morrigan's character that it is really necessary, and it crafts the world up a lot more as well. I can't wait to read Hollowpox, which is the 3rd book in this series, because I loved these first 2, and I think Morrigan Crow is such a brilliant character, and the world is so great, and the evil guy in here is called Ezra Squall, and he is quite frightening. Like, he's really charismatic, and I get really like David Tennant vibes when I'm reading him, which is funny because I kind of get David Tennant vibes from Jupiter North as well. Like, it's like David Tennant as the Doctor is Jupiter North, and David Tennant in Jessica Jones is Ezra Squall. Like, the two, it's like the spectrum of David Tennant in my mind when I'm reading this book. But I'm really looking forward to carrying on with them, and I think these books are really great. So the next prompt for Believathon was The Spilled Ink, which was to read a book which featured ghosts, and for that we read The Haunting of Pelican City by Sophie Green. So this is the 2nd book in the Popkin and Stubbs series, who follows Lil Popkin, who is a wannabe journalist, and her friend Nedley as they solve mysterious ghostly happenings around the town of Pelican City. I enjoyed this one a lot more than the first one, actually, which was surprising because I thought that they were all kind of going to stay at 3 stars for me, but this was a 3.5 star. So in this one, follows on quite closely from the first book, in which you've got a kind of evil guy faked his death. He's come back to life and he's using ghostly things to cause lots of trouble because he kind of wants to become the mayor, wants all the power in Pelican City. And yeah, so I can't really say too much about the events of this one because they're very closely linked to the first one. I don't want to give spoilers for everything that goes on in that one. But I can say that this one was better. This is a step in the right direction. This is more what I was hoping for from the Potkin and Stubbs series, because the first one disappointed me a little bit. But I'm looking forward to reading the third one and seeing how this series wraps up, because Lil's character is brilliant. I think that she's so great, and her kind of quest for the truth and wanting to bring that kind of honesty back into journalism is something that it's a good thing to encourage younger readers to think about, the way that journalism can be skewed and it can tell you a different story depending on who is writing it and depending on where it's published. And I think it's very important for young readers to be made aware of that at an early age, especially in this day and age, because there's so many different sites that like aren't quite reputable, that they might not understand, because they might think like, oh well, it says it's news so it must be true. So it's good that there are middle grade books having that discussion with their readers. The next prompt was the Dagger, which was to read a book in a dangerous setting, and for that we read The Polar Bear Explorers Club by Alex Bell. This is the first book in the Polar Bear Explorers Club series. We're following a girl called Stella, who was a snow orphan. So her father Felix found her on one of his expeditions and she was adopted by him. And in this one, this is set in a time, it kind of feels quite Victorian, so there's a huge focus on exploration and trying to discover all the like hidden parts of the world. But girls aren't allowed to be explorers, and Stella really wants to be an explorer, so she manages to convince Felix to take her, and it's like, if she misbehaves, it will reflect badly on him because they've taken a big chance letting him bring her, so she's trying to be on best behaviour. But she and a few of the other kind of kids on the expedition get separated from the adults, and they have to kind of strike out on their own and try to get back to safety, but they're still trying to make a discovery, so they still try to make it to the coldest place on this continent. There were some predictable aspects. There was like a big twist towards the end that I saw coming from 10,000 miles away, but then this is middle grade, so it might be a case that I'm more able to see that because I've read a lot of books that try and do the same thing. But I loved the world. I really love the illustrations. Like, I think that the illustrations throughout this book add so much to it. They're lovely double page spreads and they really bring the world to life. So the illustrations are by Tomislav Tomic, who is an amazing illustrator. I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does with the next few books in the series, and this is definitely one I'm going to be carrying on with, and this was another 4-star for us. The next book that we read was for the backpack prompt, which was to read an author who was new to us, and that was Jessica Valente, who wrote Starfell, Willow Moss and Lost Day. So this is the first book in the Starfell series, which follows a girl who is able to find lost things as she is approached by this very famous witch who says, I think the last Tuesday has gone missing, can you help me find it? And Willow says, well, I don't really know how a whole day can go missing, but sure, let's try and help you with that. I've also picked to double up for this prompt with the chain prompt, which is a colourful cast of characters, because in Starfell we have trolls, we have a cat who isn't a cat, who is a kobold, you've got this other witch, you've got dragons, so it's like a whole gang of characters comes together to try and solve this day, because it turns out when a whole day goes missing and it takes the memories and incidents that happen on that day with it, there are a lot of things that get lost, and there are a lot of implications for the future, and I think it's really cleverly explored. It's such a fascinating concept, and I don't know how Jessica Valente had this idea, because it is genius, but it's also very heartbreaking. And this was a book that, it was going to be a 3-star, I really enjoyed it, but the way that it ends had me almost crying. I think it's such a powerful ending to the story, and it's another one of those things where middle grade does so well in that it has an amazing plot and it's a lot of fun. There's a huge cast of characters with a barrel of laughs, but it also can talk about darker themes and it can talk about more serious subjects at the same time. Really looking forward to picking up the sequel for this one as well. so many sequels to get to, so little time to do any sort of reading. So the next prompt was actually our last prompt, because we've doubled up on the later ones earlier in this video. But that was The Hand Mirror, which was a book with a beautiful cover, and for that we picked Top Marks for Murder by Robin Stephens. This is a conflicting one to talk about, because I absolutely love the Murder Most Unladylike series. I love Daisy and Hazel. I love the whole Detective Society. I think they're brilliant. But this story was just not what I was expecting. And I think because my expectations were in completely the opposite place, it took me a very long time to get into the story. And it was actually a bit of a struggle for me. Ended up giving it 4.5 stars, which is still really good. But I think this is only the second or third book in the series that hasn't been an instant 5-star read for me. But it's because this book is set back at Deep Dean, but there's kind of murder amongst the parents, and so there's a lot of grown-up characters who are being focused on. There's a lot of like talk about gossip and all of these kind of controversies that are happening outside of school, and I think that it was almost trying to do too much. We've got Daisy and Hazel coming back to Deep Dean after a very long time away, so there's a lot of differences in dynamic there. We've got all of the girls growing up quite quickly, so there's a lot of change in dynamics there, and it just wasn't my favourite. I thought it had a very satisfying payoff. I thought that the way that it leads into the next book, knowing that the next book is set in Egypt just based off of the cover, the way that it kind of sets that up is really, really well done, and I think that Robin Stephens did a great job on that. It just wasn't the one for me, and I think it's probably my least favourite. I've rated it higher because it's cleverly written and there's a lot that I can find merit in it, but personally I think it's my least favourite story, even though it was well written and I did enjoy it. It's a hard one to talk about. And so that's it for Believathon. So that was all the books that we read for Believathon, and it was nowhere near as many books as it should have been, but I'm glad that we managed to at least get all of the prompts ticked off, even though we did have to double up, and that wasn't what we were planning on doing, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. So now I'll just quickly tell you about the other books that I read this month. So the first one of those was A Grim Legacy by Janet Jennings. This was the 2-star read for us. A bunch of teenagers get sucked into a world of the Grimm fairy tales, and they have to try and find their way back to our land. I just didn't find it very interesting. I thought that the fairy tales that were picked weren't the most obvious ones, so that was interesting, but I didn't really like any of the characters. I thought that the way that it was established was very confusing, because it jumps from one to the other, to the other, to the other, and then it very much kind of starts focusing on one particular character, so you go from thinking it's going to follow 4 different viewpoints to just really intensely focusing on one person, and that wasn't my favourite. There were also a lot of kind of spelling and grammatical errors throughout, even though it's meant to be a finished copy, but I did get this one through NetGalley, so again, thank you to the publisher. But I can see why I put this one off, because this was the first book I ever got accepted for on NetGalley, because I was too excited and I was just requesting everything. And I'm literally just reading it now, and I've also got the next couple of books in the series as well. And I don't know how I'm going to carry on with it, but I will try. Another book that I read this month was Blood Heir by Amelie Wen Zhao. This is the first book in the Blood Heir trilogy. Really enjoyed this one. Didn't think I was going to love it as much as I did. Gave it 4 stars. We follow a girl who is a blood... There's a special word for it. She has a blood affinity. She's a blood aphanite. And she can kind of control people using their blood. She can, like, pull them, push them, kill them. And she's the only person in the whole of their land that has this power, but aphanites are seen as dangerous, even if you've just got like water aphanite or you've got ground. They're seen as dangerous, and they're kind of sold into slavery a lot, so she's living in a very difficult world. But she's also the crown princess, but she's had to go on the run because her dad died and they think it was her. There's a lot going on in this story, but I loved the setting. I thought the snowy setting was really, really good. The characters, the relationship between her and the other main character in this story, I adored. It's one of those romances. It's going to be a romance. It's not yet. It's a very, very slow burn, hate to love. I'm hoping it's going to be a hate to love because we don't have the next 2 yet, so I don't know if they're going to end up together or not, but it's delectable. Like, I loved the relationship between them. I thought the way that his feelings towards her grew were really, really well developed. and it's one of those books that I think in the UK it's been published as adult, and in the US it's been published as YA, and it's definitely in that crossover. So if you do like YA fantasy but you're looking for something that's a bit less predictable, a bit more kind of grown up, a bit more murdery, this is one that I would recommend, and I'm really looking forward to carrying on with the sequel for this one as well, because it comes out in March. And that's the 10 books that we read in the second half of the month. I'm sorry that my brain doesn't seem to be functioning today. I can hardly remember any characters' names. I can hardly remember any plot points. So this has been a really useless video for you to watch. I could blame it on the fact that I'm back at work in like an hour. I could blame it on the fact that I'm really stressed, but let's just say it's because I'm a bloody idiot. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you've enjoyed our Bookmas videos so far, and I hope that you will continue to enjoy them, as we do have another 3.5 weeks of Bookmas left, and I already can't remember anything that I'm trying to say, so it's just going to get better from here. Tune in to see my brain just completely melt. Mr. Ezra is going to come and say bye because he's sad. Yeah, would you like to come and say bye? Would you like to say bye bye to the people? Is he allowed to?
Yeah, he's allowed to.
My lovely baby got a bit sad, so he has come to help me say bye-bye to you. But yes, please continue to join in if you would like to. If you've read any of these books and you liked them, please let me know down in the comments if you agree with me, if you don't agree with me. And we'll see you tomorrow with our next video. Bye! You don't want to wave? That.